One of the great things about working with rehydratable paints like gouache, on my palette here I have gouache on the left, going from 2 shades of yellow to red to blue to some earth tones and white. And then on the right here I have watercolor, sort of a similar progression. And one of the nice things about working with rehydratable color is that right now, because I haven't painted since yesterday, these colors are kind of dried out, but I can take my spray bottle and I can come on in and spray the colors and just get them a little bit moist. And then when I come in to paint, they're already, the pigment's already sort of activated. So you can see too where have some parts of my palette that are still dirty, but to start a new day of painting, I like to kind of put water down, clean it off, have a nice clean surface. And the other thing that I often do when I'm working with either gouache or watercolor is I'll have a paper towel, a clean paper towel. I'll often fold it over a couple times so it's smaller. And when I take my brush out of the water that it's been soaking in, right now the brush is very, very wet. And if I bring that brush into one of my colors, let's say I bring it into my cadmium red, which is already nice and wet because I sprayed it, and I bring that color onto the palette, there's still quite a lot of water in there, which can be a really nice effect if you lay this down on paper. But if you don't quite want as much water, what I often do is I'll just take this very, very wet brush and just tap it onto the paper towel, and what happens is it absorbs a lot of the extra water. And then when I go to make a brush stroke on my watercolor paper, it's a slightly drier effect, so I can make a stroke that has more of a dry brush effect. So that dry brush effect is really different, and again, something with a more textured watercolor paper that can happen. It's very different than a brush effect where I haven't taken the extra water off, and in that case, if I bring the brush across, it's much more of a watery effect and actually more coverage in a way. So depending on the amount of water you use, rehydrating the colors before you start, and then basically, whether you remove water or keep the water in the brush, it's going to make a very different effect when you're painting. Obviously too, when you add even more water to the mix, and you can almost see it on the palette how this very bright kind of intense red starts to dilute into something where I'm actually seeing the color of the palette through it. When I bring that down onto paper, and you'll notice that in that case, because the molecules of pigment have actually been divided apart further, that has this very watery effect because of the addition of more water, which I know sort of seems common sense, but it's something you really want to consider when you start to work with these hydratable colors. So notice how much water you're using, hydrate the colors beforehand, make sure you have a nice clean palette to use so that the colors don't get muddy on you, and always change your water, clean your water quite often so that you can make sure that your colors are nice and pure each time.